All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Like I said, we're recording this presentation, so anybody that piles in afterwards will be able to get that posted in the meetup group. We have a packed schedule, so I want to keep us on track. My name is TJ Kidder. I'm the marketing manager here at Learn Academy. If you're unfamiliar with who Learn Academy is, we're a coding bootcamp located here in San Diego. And this meetup we put together, we did a few of these previously when we were able to do them in person. You know, everything that's kind of happened recently, we decided to take this virtual. So welcome to our first virtual WTF coding event. Sarah put a really good kind of a sentence there on what this meetup is about, and it's you know, a brief answer to the question of coding. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this along to Sarah. Sarah is one of, she was a former Learn student, is now an instructor here at Learn Academy, and she's going to go ahead and take us on this coding journey. So thank you, Sarah. Please go ahead and take it.
Thank you, TJ. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming. Like TJ said, this is actually our first virtual meetup. I feel like I've done virtual everything else. I did virtual yoga, done virtual family hangs. I've been teaching in a virtual classroom for a little over a month now, which means I spend my day in a Zoom room or a series of Zoom rooms, which seems to pretty much be the new normal. So I did want to talk just briefly about Zoom so that you guys know what you have available and how I use Zoom to interact with my students. So I'm sharing my screen with you, and you can choose to see like just me on the right-hand side, or you can click a little grid icon that will give you a gallery view, and you can see the panel of the other people joining us. I personally like being able to see everyone, so it doesn't feel like I'm talking to myself, but some people find it distracting, so do whatever works best for you. Along the bottom of your screen, there's an icon for a chat feature. And if you don't see a chat icon, look in the more options. Sometimes it lives in that menu depending on your screen size. And I have the chat open on my screen, so feel free to ask a question there. But also feel free to just speak up and and ask a question. I welcome those, whichever you're more comfortable with. You can mute yourself or unmute yourself on the bottom left. But again, just like feel free to comment at any point. Just jump in. Your odds are you're not the only person with that question. And I personally like it when I can have discussions with my students because I always learn a lot. And just so you know, I have an additional monitor to the left of my laptop screen so I can keep all my windows open. So if you see me looking over to the side, that's just why. Sometimes I feel like it's odd when your speaker doesn't line up with where your camera is. And later in the meetup, I'll invite you to follow along with me as we play around with some developer tools in the browser. I recommend Google Chrome. That's what I'm using, but I'll give everyone a few minutes to juggle their own screen setup when we get to that point. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Proctor, and I'm an instructor at Learn Academy. Like TJ said, Learn Academy is a web development bootcamp. It was San Diego's, in fact, Southern California's first web development bootcamp. Learn is a full-time, 4-month intensive program, and we specialize in career transitioners. We teach full stack development, and I'm going to talk about what that means in just a minute. One of our missions at Learn is to help build the tech community in San Diego, and hosting meetups like this one was one of the ways that we offer our knowledge to anyone who's interested. This particular meetup came into existence about a year ago, and I think the world of development and coding can seem really intimidating, and I wanted to do a meetup that talks plainly about what being a developer is in a way that's really, really approachable. That doesn't make an assumption of knowledge, and it doesn't scare away people who may feel intimidated or a little unsure about what coding is. And I was kind of struggling to explain this idea in a meeting at work, appropriately enough. And my boss, Rob, said, so you want to explain what the F coding is? So that's where we came up with our name. And that's my goal. I want to explain and explore coding in a way that my mom finds understandable and interesting. And to be clear, that is not a diss on my mom. She's very smart. It's just the big picture goal of how I've put together this meetup. So here we are, and thank you for joining me on our first virtual WTF. So as I mentioned, about a month ago, Learn transitioned to a virtual classroom, much like the rest of the world. For 5 years, we taught an in-person class, and I was honestly a little nervous when we decided and realized that we needed to go remote. I was really worried about losing the energy in a virtual classroom, but it's going really well, like amazingly well. My students are awesome, my team is super rad, and while there's pros and cons to every situation, I feel like we're surviving in a time when lots of people and businesses are suffering. And I'm so heartbroken for all the people who had jobs that disappeared. It's so tragic, and I feel really lucky to be able to have transitioned pretty seamlessly to a remote world at Learn. I feel really extra lucky to be here because a few years ago, I was working at a restaurant that just closed temporarily, as far as I know, but all of my former coworkers are filing for unemployment and worrying about what happens next. I worked at this fancy fresh restaurant, and I was a bartender and a server and a bar manager, and I did orderings and built cocktail menus and wine pairings, and I did chalk art on the wall. I did all the stuff. And working in a restaurant, you know, you make pretty good money, so I just did it for far too long. And I just ran out of new jobs to do and new things to learn, and it was just mind-numbingly dull. And there's all these built-in problems that nobody had any interest in solving, and it drove me nuts to find a way to fix a problem and then have everyone around me go, oh, well, that's just the way we do it, or it's always been like that. So I just finally hit a wall, and I was like, I have to figure out the next step. I studied psychology in college without any real direction, and I never really felt like I had a passion for a thing or something I was excited about or proud to do. So I literally sat down and made a list. What do I want my day to look like? What would make me feel good? What would allow me to keep my interest and allow me to explore new things? What can I do where I can problem solve and create new systems and organize things? And I came up with programming. So I went to Learn, and long story short, it's the best thing I've ever done, and here I am. And I really love doing these types of meetups, and I love teaching entry-level classes because I truly believe that if I can do it, you can do it. It's hard, and I won't sugarcoat how hard you have to work to be successful, but it's absolutely doable. And I want to make sure that I'm doing my part to make the barrier to entrance as low as possible, because technology needs all of you. Technology needs diversity, and it needs input from all the people who use it, which in 2020 is everyone. So there was a point in the recent past when technology was made by and used by a very small group of people. And the people making technology were very, very smart, predominantly younger white males, and we thank them very much for their contribution. We couldn't have done it without them, but that can't be a thing anymore. As a society, we have to open up this field to everybody. It's too important not to. Coding is in our everyday lives. It's in our cars and our medical devices and our credit cards and all of our entertainment, and of course our phones and all the apps that keep us functioning in the world. Technology is not a luxury item. It's critical to how our daily lives function. And that can't be any more evident than it is right now. We all need to stay home to stay safe. And the motto floating around right now is stay apart together. And how you really stay together is through technology. So I want to help all of you make the world better and making technology more inclusive. And so let's talk about what the F that means. So what does it mean when we talk about coding? When I first told people that I was learning coding, I got a lot of mixed responses. Some people thought I was learning medical coding. Some people asked me if I was learning binary or building computers. And really, it's none of those things. While the scope of the term developer is very, very broad, it generally refers to creating software. Software being the set of instructions that you feed to your computer to perform an action. And as a web developer, you're creating web and mobile applications. And the general distinction between a web application and a web page is, does the user log in? Does the service save information about the user and allow the user to create content? So if I go to the website of a restaurant and I see their menu and their location and information about their business, that to me is a web page. Whereas I go to a website like Zoom, I can create an account and I can schedule meetings, and my information is stored by Zoom. And that's a web application. Mobile applications are basically the same concept with a slight difference in the tools that are used and the deployment method, meaning that content's available through the App Store versus in the browser. And learning to build static pages is super cool and very useful. But when we talk about being a web developer, really we're talking about building web applications. So things that you sign into and that store content. So why learn programming? In the early days of my cohort, we were asked why we wanted to pursue development. And this is an aggregated list of what my cohort came up with. And I really like these things, so I wanted to share them with you. Programming is challenging, and you will never know everything about development. It is impossible to know it all. I work with amazing people who have been programming for 25 years, and they don't know it all. And they'll be the first to tell you, and they'll be the first to tell you that you won't either. And that can be really overwhelming when you're first learning. A lot of my students really struggle with that concept, but it's also kind of freeing because you can't know it all. So there's just always more to learn. It's a lot of creative problem solving. There's no right answer in coding. If it works, that's the right answer. There are better ways than others, and there's definitely more elegant ways than others, but building code isn't black and white in terms of right or wrong. It's a very creative, free-form process. It's also a practical and a functional trade. It's really neat to learn a skill that's so relevant. And for me, studying social science was always about learning theory and history and looking for trends and behaviors, but learning code is such a defined skill with such tangible outcomes, which is really neat. It's a very unique situation, I think. Another one that I see a lot of people drawn to coding for the ability to create. I see people from artistic backgrounds, specifically, the people that just have ideas in their head that they need to get out and to make real. And coding allows you to do that. You can express yourself through creation. And the organizational skills, one of my personal faves. You have to have a very organized mind to be a successful developer. Your code base and your file structure can be huge and confusing, as well as all the tasks you're managing. It requires a lot of detail-oriented organization. It's also a universal language. So even though coding languages are often use English words, everyone across the world uses the same coding languages. So everyone can communicate through code. And it allows you to understand the technology that we use every day. We use our phones to function. Back when I was actually going to work, my phone was the key to the front door. And now being remote, we definitely need technology to go to work, plus whatever else is required in our day. And most people don't know how that stuff works. And learning to code is kind of like peeking behind the curtain, which is pretty neat. It also opens opportunities anywhere in the world. And this is a huge one right now. Developers are needed everywhere, and they're needed right now. And there are jobs all over the world. But also a lot of development teams have worked remotely before the pandemic. At Learn, we have a company that we work really closely with that does remote development and does exclusively pair programming remotely. And they have for years and years. So we were knocking on their door and asking how they make remote transitions successful. And they had a lot of great tips because this isn't new to them. And coding is artistic and beautiful, and you can make beautiful things with code. There's a lot of digital art mediums that are amazing, but the code itself can be really beautiful. Sometimes I run across a code snippet that just like stops me in my tracks because it's just it's so cool, it's so neat. It can be a very beautiful process. Right. So, programming languages. They're very much like languages that we speak. Languages are written, or languages have been created by other people, and that allow us to create new ideas using unique combinations. So programming languages have vocabulary. They have things built into their base. They have sentence structure. They have punctuation that we call syntax. They also have grammar, so kind of like best practices and standards that developers abide by in order to make their code strong and readable by humans. Because the goal of code is communication. One, to communicate to the computer what actions we want to perform. Computers are inflexible machines. They are really, really good at doing one thing over and over and over again. Computers are not good at nuance or implication or getting the gist of what you mean. And the second thing is that we have to communicate to other developers. And really, this is the more important thing, because as a developer, your code needs to constantly be updated and it has to move forward. And nobody is going to do that if they can't understand what your code has intended to do. So you have to communicate to both other developers and even to future you. And I'll tell you that nobody is a worse developer than you 6 months ago. So no matter how fabulous your code is, if you can't update it, it's going to be thrown out. So programming languages, in the broadest, most oversimplified terms, can be broken down into two main components, the front end and the back end. The front end, sometimes referred to as client-side development, is basically all the stuff that the user sees and interacts with on a web application. The front end is both the UI, which stands for user interface, and the user experience, or the UX. In large companies, they will be teams of people that are in charge of each of these aspects. The UI is the visual aspect of the page. Is the app nice to look at? Is it pleasing to the eye? Is it on brand for the business? I think of the UI as like the art major of development. And then the UX is the ease and the flow with which the user can navigate and use the application. So is the app intuitive? Can the user easily get to the desired result? Is the user able to access key features? So the UX is kind of like the sociology major of development. So I remember a few years ago when the Lyft app first implemented the feature where you could like see all the little car icons on a map. And it was super, super cool. But the process started as like entering information and, you know, confirming pickup locations. And eventually you got to confirm your driver and this map would pop up and it would take up most of the screen and you could see the car icon. But the problem was that there was one more button you had to click in order to confirm your pickup. But from the user's perspective, the confirm button was small and it was at the bottom of the page and your eyes were looking at all this new visually stimulating feedback. So I taught my parents how to use a Lyft when they were visiting me one time, and they decided to flex their new skills to get a ride home from the airport. So they're standing at the airport, they're watching the cars drive around on their app, and they can't figure out why no one's stopping. And so my dad calls me all frustrating, and he's like, the app is broken. And while I found this to be a hilarious moment of old person syndrome, it's actually a bigger problem for Lyft, because that one button defines whether you're a customer or not a customer. And that one button is ultimately making Lyft money or not. And the baby boomer generation is a huge market for rideshare companies. And so that's the importance of diversity in development and creating good user experience for everybody. So there's lots of different front-end technologies, but there's 3 technologies that are on pretty much every web page in existence. And those are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And those are the main building blocks for development. And those are the languages that we're going to focus on in just a little bit. So the second main component of development, is the backend or server-side development. And that is all the code that is under the hood. It's the code that allows web apps to save information and render that information when it's requested by the user. So the backend is all the content storage and data structures. So it's kind of the engineering major of development. But just like the front end, there are many backend languages that can be used for development on the server side. At Learn, we teach Ruby on Rails, which is a framework called Rails that's written in a language called Ruby. But other popular backend development languages are Python and PHP, Node.js, .NET, and Java, which Java should not be confused with JavaScript. The guy who invented JavaScript purposefully named it in a confusing way, hoping to steal a little of Java's thunder, and spoiler alert, it worked. But those are 2 very different languages, and if you confuse them, it will be a very big indicator that you don't know what you're talking about. So backend development is code that receives requests from the front end and then sends back information. And to fully understand what that means, let's talk about the internet. So again, this is ridiculously oversimplified explanation. People get PhDs and stuff that I'm just glossing over. But the internet is essentially, it's the largest machine on Earth. And it's a lot like a colony, like that colony of quaking aspens, where they all have interconnected roots. And in the most fundamental way, the internet is a series of tubes that connect servers all over the world. And really a server is just a computer with all of the user aspects stripped away. So the keyboard and the screens, it's just the fundamental piece of the computer. So your computer is a server. And developers use their local machines as servers during the development process of an application to run our code. And all of the content for all the websites of the world it's stored somewhere on a server, in a physical location on a server. And Amazon actually owns like a boatload of these server farms. A lot of the internet is hosted on Amazon servers. And server farms are pretty much just warehouses in the middle of nowhere where land is cheap in a location that's probably a little cooler climate, and there's just stacks and stacks of computers. And when a website is hosted, meaning that it can be found on the internet with a URL, that content is stored on a server, or more likely many servers. And the user makes requests for that information. And the requests travel along these tubes to get to the server. It gets the information and it comes back. And I really love this picture that shows all of the fiber optic cables that run along the ocean floor. I just think it's really cool and fascinating. And so there's this little robot guy that lays down the cables on the ocean floor, and this isn't in any way pertinent to the topic. I just think it's really, really neat. So the internet in a nutshell, the long and the short of the internet from a developer's point of view is that it's a series of requests and responses. And every time you navigate to a new page within an application, if you enter information on a form or post a picture or click on a show more link, anything that gives you a new view is a new request response cycle. And development is basically creating code that makes successful cycles. And request response cycles follow HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And HTTP is a collection of rules that are agreed upon to make this cycle consistent and successful. So there's four main components of the protocol that I'm just going to briefly talk about. The request, which consists of a location and an action, and the response, which consists of a status code and the payload. So let's start with the request. So the request response cycle starts when you hit enter on a URL. That may look differently. It could be clicking a button, it could be submitting a form, but essentially you're submitting a URL. And a URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator. And don't memorize that because no one does, I wrote it down. But URLs all correspond to an IP address. And an IP address is the physical location of that server where the information is stored that you want to access. So it's our first item, is location. So an IP address is set by, is a set of 4 numbers. Each number is divided into by periods. And so the numbers consist of a digit between 0 and 255, because 255 is the largest number that can be represented by 1 bit. And a bit is just a unit of storage that can hold up to 8 binary digits, meaning any combination of up to 8 ones and zeros. And that represents the numbers 0 to 255. And development is basically translating things from human readable information to computer readable information. And this is a perfect example of that. URLs are for humans, google.com, facebook.com, those are for humans. IP addresses are for computers. Most of us don't process information in octets of base 10 representation of base 2 numbers. At least I don't. So the first challenge we have in our request response cycle is mapping the URL to an IP address. And there's a lot further complexity to that process that I'm going to skip over, but it does take a lot of work from an energy and processing standpoint to look up an IP address. And I mentioned the developers often use their own computer as a server, and the IP address of your local server or your home server is 127.0.1.0.0.1. So no place like home. And the URL that maps to that IP address is localhost 3000. So we often code up our local environments to be displayed on localhost 3000. So the next part is our action. So along with the location, the second thing that makes up the request is the type of request we're making, the action that describes that request. Developers have a very specific type of action in their codes, and there's a lot of best practices that we follow. It's called REST, or RESTful architecture pattern, and it's the thing that's listed here. And it just, you don't need to worry about the details of it, but it covers the main actions that you would want to achieve with your code, which the main actions are that we would want to have a GET request, which would be listing content. We just want to see words on a page. And then creating content. So a post request, which is, adding new things. You think when you post on Facebook, you're adding new content. We can also edit content, which corresponds to a put request, or we can delete content. And so those are actions that have to be interacted with from our user standpoint through our web page. And so the RESTful architecture lays out how you should program your URL in order to achieve that. So there we have our request. So our request finds the server, and the server responds. So that brings us to our third item on the list. And our third item is the response codes. So response codes are a tool that developers use to provide information about the request response cycle. Every request gets a response, but some of those responses are successes and sometimes they're errors. But by giving a response code, developers can tell the application what to do. If their response code says like, hey, all good, great, go ahead and load the page. But if not, let's tell our user that there was a problem rather than just like leaving with a blank page or having them deal with a broken application. So you guys may recognize one of the more well-known response codes is a 404, which is information not found. And it's used as kind of the generic catch-all for something about your request is wrong. There's an error coming from the client side of the request response cycle. And if that happens, and it does all the time, developers can code in a page to their application that will show a cute error message, or maybe give instructions on how to fix the problem. So there's this website that I love that has cat pictures for all the status codes. It's amazing. And the function of all of the status codes definitely lies beyond the scope of this talk, but I just really wanted us to look at cat pictures. So I'll run through the different responses. So the first one we have is a 100 level of response code. There's only a couple of these because they're just informational. The second level is good. We want this. This is like, everything's okay, working as expected. This is what we want. The 300s are redirects. So the thing you're looking for isn't here anymore, or you sent the request to the wrong place. So we have our redirect code levels for 300s. And then our 400s again are the client side error. So something about the request was wrong. There's lots of 400 level status codes because it's a pretty common mistake to make, to have a slight error in your URL. And then the 500s are server-side errors, meaning that the request was good, but for some reason the server isn't able to provide what you're looking for. And then, just on a weird tangent, I just wanted to tell a quick story about the 418 error. So the name of this error code is "I'm a teapot." And it was created as an April Fool's Day joke in 1998. And the joke was that as much as we all love HTTP, which really, it only been created in 1989, so it was fairly young in all things considered. But so as much as we love HTTP, there should really be an HTCP/CP, which stands for HyperText Coffee Pot Control Protocol, for the very specific time that a coffee pot needs to transmit documents over the internet for controlling, monitoring, diagnosing coffee pots. So it continues that any attempt to brew coffee with a teapot should result in the error code 418, "I'm a teapot." And the error code description is the resulting entity body may be short and stout. So this joke just lingered as a weird internet Easter egg for a long time. But a few years ago, somebody who I can only assume is in need of a hug, decided to get rid of 418 as it serves no practical purpose. But some people had a very strong opinion about that. And there was a 15-year-old who mounted a crusade to save error code 418. And Reddit got a hold of it and it blew up. So we still have 418. And if you're interested, you can check out save418.com if you would like to help this crusade for a weird piece of internet history. So cool, let's move on to the good stuff, the payload. So the payload of Hypertext Transfer Protocol is Hypertext Markup Language, or HTML. HTML is the foundation of the internet. Everything you see on a website or in a mobile app is wrapped up and delivered inside of HTML. Often this payload can be huge. Imagine the size of, say, a Netflix payload. In order for the payload to travel as quickly as possible, it gets broken up into tiny little packets that are 1,000 to 1,500 bytes. And they may even take different paths, but they all arrive and reassemble into their appropriate place, like the kid from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So when all that's said and done, this full request response cycle and all of its intricacies, and no matter how far your server is from the computer or your computer from the server that's requesting, all of this happens in a fraction of a second. And if it doesn't happen in a fraction of a second, your user will leave you. Speed is one of the unsexy pillars of development. The other two being security and accessibility, in case anyone is curious. But speed is immensely important. We notice if a page takes more than a second to load. Like we react to that in just 1 second. And more than half of the users won't wait 3 seconds for a page to load. So speed is super important, and it's just amazing at how fast and how well that content delivery system happens. It's pretty amazing. It's very easy to get frustrated when a page doesn't load quickly, but I think having a full understanding can at least provide a bit of calm while you're frustrated. All right, so one of the most important tools that a developer uses is a computer command line. This allows developers to make text-based commands to their computer. And in the early days of computers, this is all there was. The reason personal computers became a thing was because of the graphical user interface, or as we like to call it, the GUI, the GUI. GUIs give us the ability to view file structures that are nested in a windowed format, and to point and click. It's what made Bill Gates a boatload of money. PCs would never become a thing without the fun displays and the clickable icons and the screensavers with flying toasters. But behind the click is still just a text-based command. It's still the communication between a human and a computer. So I wanted to take a look at the terminal. And developers use a terminal to bypass the GUI and interact directly with their computers. So we can, I want to show you that we can use terminal to ping another server. We can just send out a little request and ask for a tiny response, and we can see that cycle happen. Cool. Do you, can you guys all see the terminal with a bunch of code I should probably clear up? Oops. Cool. So make this a little bigger. So we can send out a ping to a website. So if I do ping, this just sends out that little teeny request and just asks for a super small response. And we can see that the information that's being sent, we can see the IP address of the website that we are pinging, and then we can see that the time that it took for this cycle to happen. So we can see the transaction in milliseconds. So we can see the minimum, the average, and the maximum, and then the standard deviation, which is, you know, it's just some good, clean fun. We'll see how Learn's website's doing, TJ. There we go. And now we're doing that request response cycle through our terminal. Cool. All right. Let me go back here and bring my chat over. Awesome. Great. So let's talk about a little bit more about the payload. So the three languages that every developer needs to know: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So HTML, HyperText Markup Language, is it's the words on the page. It's the skeleton that's holding up the structure of the web page. Or if we go back to our language analogy, HTML is the nouns of our language. And the most basic unit of HTML is called a tag. Tags give the computer information on how to display the content. There's two different types of tags. Some tags, like headers or buttons, give specific instructions on how the content should be displayed, and others are just generic containers. And div tags, like we have here, are just our favorite generic containers. All code needs to be stored in something, and a div is like a clear storage tote for our code. So tags open and they close, And everything inside of them is the inner HTML. And that's the stuff that shows on the page. So tags are just instructions for the computer so that we can pass more information to how we want that tag to render. So we can pass attributes. We can pack more information inside of that tag and give more instructions along the way. And we can pack in as many attributes as we want into our tag. Well, within reason. Like, we wouldn't want our code to get to a point where it wasn't communicating our intent, because remember, like, the number one thing is the communication. So by giving an attribute to the tag, we can allow our computer to recognize it in a more specific way. So for here, we can put an ID on our tag, and then we can reference that somewhere else in our program. So this is an example. I took this screenshot of one of my students' portfolios. I just happened to have this tab open when I was looking for a good example, and this is what her code looks like when it's rendered in the browser. And I'll show you in just a few minutes how I found this particular view, but I like this example because it's a little bit less busy than some of the sites that we're going to look at in just a few minutes. And you can see here there's lots of div tags. So labeling them either individually with an ID or grouping them together with a class, like you can see a couple of these div tags did here, allows us to reference those div tags, which is quite useful. So the next, oh, I'm sorry, I just remembered to peek at my chat, which is on my other screen over here. And so, thank you. How do you know how to assign an ID or a class? That's a really good question, and that's something that comes up in development pretty often. You would use an ID if you want to just reference that one time. IDs are only designed to be used on one occasion. Classes are the thing that group something together. So classes are reusable. I could have, you know, all of the divs in one section all have the same class name, and maybe I want all of those to be a particular style. Maybe I want all of that background color to be pink, or I want all of the font to look a certain way. And so I can label multiple tags with a class and group them together. An ID only gets used one time.
Sarah, we had a quick question real quick.
Yeah.
Ara wanted to know when to assign an ID or a class. When
For
do you
sure.
know to when?
Yep. Great. Yeah, I think I just covered that, but just to be clear, an ID is used one time, and a class can be used multiple times. But thanks for looking out, TJ, I appreciate it. So the next language that all the developers need to know is CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's all of the code that makes your page look good. Without CSS, every page looks like it fell out of the 90s. And if anyone is here is old enough to have a MySpace page, when you made your MySpace page look fabulous, you were using CSS. So going back to our analogy of HTML being the skeleton, CSS is the skin that covers the skeleton. But you can't have a CSS unless you have something to style. So you have to have HTML in order to have CSS. And back to our language analogy, if HTML is the nouns, then CSS would be like the adjectives. So you can target particular tags and then apply styling to them. And you can do that with either an ID or a class, again, if it's the single one or the grouping, or you can just target a tag in general. If I wanted, in the example I have posted, if I wanted all of my header tags to look a particular way, I could just style the tag name itself. Or if I only wanted one thing that I identified with an ID, I could add stylings to that, or again, my groupings for a class. Cool. And then here's the big guns, JavaScript. So JavaScript is our power language. It provides interaction with the user. So if you click a button and see an alert pop up, or watch pictures auto scroll on your screen, that's all JavaScript. So JavaScript is the muscle for our skeleton, but it still needs that HTML skeleton, just like CSS does. So it's kind of the verbs of our language. It's the action. And JavaScript allows us to perform logic. So for the other two languages, they are just markup languages. They're just static pages. And JavaScript is different in that it allows us to manipulate data. We can store information and ask the computer to run little programs that will evaluate the information and perform certain actions based on the outcome. And that's really the power of development, is being able to put that decision-making process into the computer. So because JavaScript manipulates data, it's very particular about how it processes this data. And JavaScript has categories of information that it'll work with, and we call these data types. So there's roughly 7 different types of data types, and I won't nitpick about the specific breakdown about those, but the ones that most developers are first familiar with are strings and numbers and Boolean values. So strings are just characters stored inside quotation marks. And strings have particular properties like length, or the ability to identify a location of a character within the context of the string. Numbers are exactly what you think they are. Numbers allow us to perform mathematical functions, to compare values. And Booleans are true false values. So they can be used for logical comparisons. For example, is 6 greater than 3 would return a Boolean value. And in JavaScript, we can store information by creating variables. So just like in math class where x can equal 6, anytime you reference x, you're really referencing that value that's assigned to x. And developers do the same thing. Anything saved in a variable needs to be a data type. So here we have the name of the variable and the value of the variable that it's holding. And the value has to be one of the particular data types so that JavaScript can recognize it. All right. So talk about something that I use almost every day. The Chrome developer tools. Some other browsers have development tools as well, but Chrome's has pretty great stuff. So at this time, I'll encourage you, if you would like to participate, to reorganize your screen so that you can have access to a browser and still see the Zoom room. So if you want to split your screen, and if I can help you in any ways, please let me know. But I'll give you a second to pull up a Chrome browser so that we can play around a little bit. I'm going to do the same. Whoops. Can you all still see my screen with a Google browser view? Great, thank you. So while everyone's getting situated, I'll just talk a little bit about why I use Google Chrome. So Chrome is built on a JavaScript V8 engine. V8 is an open source technology and that's written in a coding language called C++. And yeah, even coding languages are written in other coding languages. They all have to come from somewhere. And C++ is one of a collection of C-level languages that are a stepping stone between languages like JavaScript that are a little more human readable and machine code that's read by the computer processors as binary input. So this goes back to that fundamental aspect of coding is communication between our human and our computer. And JavaScript is more readable by humans, so we say it has a higher level of abstraction. It's more steps away from that binary level. So Chrome is built on a JavaScript engine. We use Chrome to run JavaScript code, and we can also use it to kind of play around a little bit. So this is definitely not traditional coding by any means, but it's kind of fun because it's just sitting right under our noses, which I like. It doesn't require any extra tools or apps or any special knowledge of anything. We don't need a text editor. We don't even need our terminal. We can just play around in the browser. So if you have a Google Chrome browser open, if you right click, or for my Mac friends, if you control click, you'll get this little menu that's popped up. And there's a piece down here for inspect. And that's what I'm going to click on. If anyone has issues or questions or anything, please feel free to either ask or unmute yourself and just shout it out. I'm just checking the chat. Oh, thanks, Rachel, for talking about let and var. Fantastic. All right. Cool. Does anyone need a couple more minutes to get set up? Good? Awesome. All right. So, sorry, I'm using my other monitor, so I'm looking over to the side, but. Okay, so what we're looking at now by using this inspect tool is that we can see all of the HTML and the CSS for Google. And there's a lot going on here. I mean, rightfully so, it is Google. But you can do this on any page you want. I can click over, I think I had it open for Wikipedia. And then this is the code from the example that I showed you earlier. That's one of my students' profile pages. And so I can look at her code as well. And Wikipedia and Google, of course, have a lot more tags because they also are doing a lot more metadata and other stuff that they have going in the background of their page rather than just the straight code. But this is great because this is on every web page. Every page that you go to has this behind the scenes, and then the Chrome developer tools just make this very easy to access. So if we can kind of parse through some of the noise here and get down and see like what the actual tags are doing. So if you hover over some of the tags, the corresponding piece will highlight on the page. So we can see that, let's see, here is the main piece of our page. But I can look at other smaller pieces, like just the input. And we can open these little gray chevrons and see nested components inside of it. The other side of that is that you can use this tool up in the left corner of your developer tools. And if you click on that, it allows you to pinpoint on the browser and hover over things, and it'll show you the corresponding code. So you can go both ways. You can hover over the code to see the corresponding piece of the browser, or vice versa. Okay, so I was just looking around to find a good spot that we can talk about here. So let's see. We've got the full body here, and then inside of it, there's a lot of other stuff going on. But really, it's these medium div tags that we're wanting to look at. Let's see, perfect. So I've got a div here and it has an ID, and the ID is most visited. So that, you know, is the auto population of sites that I use regularly. And I can look at the stylings for this most visited section by looking at the stylings for that ID. So over on the other column, I can find ID most visited, cool. So most visited over here, and this is listing all of the stylings for that section. And the kind of fun thing is that while you're in the dev tools, you can actually play with these. So I can add a background color. Cadet blue. Oh, that is lovely. And so you can actually add stylings into the page, which is kind of fun. So I went and found the div I was interested in, went and found the styling elements. I clicked on that and started typing a little bit and got that auto population list. And then I hit enter once I had the background color. It took me over to the other piece, and then it gave me a list of colors I could choose from. Dark khaki, lovely. Some other kind of fun thing is that you can do the same thing with an image. So let's see. So we've got our image here. Let's find the code that corresponds with that. All right, so I'm looking at an image tag, which again is just that basic HTML tag specific to the image so that it describes the type of content. This is not one of those empty containers. This is a very specific type of code that's going to populate an image. And within this image, I see an attribute, again, one of the things that's packed in to provide more context to the tag, and it's called source. And then I see a URL or a piece of code here that's Google's using to bring in their image. And so I can play around with that if I want. So let's go find a good cat picture. Love it. So I'm going to copy my own URL and go back to my image tag. Should I make that bigger? So image, I've got an ID, and then I'm seeing my source. So I'm going to double click on that and just get rid of what Google has and paste my cat image. And there I have a very distorted cat image on my Google page. It's fun. It's fun to play around in the developer tools because reading code is really just trying to parse through and figure out what's going on, what connects to which piece, and trying to conceptualize from the code standpoint what that's going to do in the browser. And that's a really hard thing to do when you get into really complex code. It's something that takes years of practice, and it's a great way to get familiar with the layout and then also what the options are. I mean, while we're clearly doing this just for fun, if I was in charge of changing that image, I would go into that source code, pinpoint that exact piece that I needed to change, and then modify that image in the same way. It would just be permanent versus us playing around in the developer tools. I want to find the full body. Okay, let's find something else fun we can change. I'm going to try to find one of the search bar, the tags. Here we go. So there's a tag here that's a link. And this link would take me to my Gmail. And again, this is a specific type of tag that pinpoints that it's going to take us elsewhere. It's a link tag, or it's anchored here and it's going to take us elsewhere. But ultimately, there's that piece of inner HTML. We've got the tags, we've got all the attributes that are nested inside of the tag, giving us more content, but the inner HTML is going to be what shows up on the page. And so for here, I found that piece where it says Gmail. And because I'm just playing around, I can change it to whatever I want. It's fun, you know, it's just some good, clean, mild fun. But I can do that on whatever. Oh, I was playing earlier and I changed the Wikipedia to a cat picture as well because the internet just doesn't have enough cat pictures. So trying to help out here. Did anyone else make cool, cool modifications to their Google Chrome? Cool. So the other thing that developer tools provides us is the ability to run JavaScript. So I was in that elements portion where I could see all of the HTML and all of the CSS laid out, but there's another tab at the top where I have console. And if I click over to that, I got some interesting stuff on my Google Chrome, but this console is just a JavaScript runtime. This allows us to just put JavaScript code in here. It is definitely not the most effective way to code by any means, but I can play around with it and I can just run JavaScript code on my browser. So one of the fun ones is to have your computer talk to you, is we can do an alert. Alert is one of those pieces of code like we talked about where it's like a vocabulary word. It's a piece of, you know, English language words that's plugged into our coding language. It has a specified preset action. So if we do alert followed by parentheses, we can pass in content. Again, our content has to be one of the data types we talked about because JavaScript only recognizes content that we're providing it if it's in one of those particular categories or data types. So if I use quotation marks, I can type in hello. I close my quotation marks so that I'm completing my string, and then I'm wrapping that in parentheses for the action of my JavaScript vocabulary word alert. And when I hit enter, my computer talks to me, which is fun. And so those alerts would happen the same way if you've ever had something that pops up that requires your attention. That code would be embedded into that code base, but it would look the exact same and it would behave the same way. So you can write as much JavaScript in here as you want. It's a little challenging because it's not real, it wasn't really designed for this. So writing multi-lined code is challenging, but you can play around with it, which is fun. So maybe I'll have my computer say, hi, Sarah. I like to make my computer talk to me. And so this is just exploiting that idea that our Google Chrome is just built on JavaScript and allows us to play in the browser. And this is another good way to just get familiar with some basic coding functionality. You know, if you're looking up or doing some research on how to learn more about code and you're just not feeling familiar enough with all of the tools, or you're feeling overwhelmed by the options, you have the browser. It's right in front of you and it's available, and it's a great way to learn. Did anyone else have any questions? Feel free to speak up if you do. So when I was looking through, because sometimes you'll see errors in the Chrome browser, we use this tool, you know, sometimes run little snippets of JavaScript, but we also use this to diagnose errors. And we'll go looking through our Chrome browser to try and find what's wrong with our program. And so, but sometimes you'll see errors just in live websites. And of course, not when you're looking for them, because I was looking all over through the tabs that I had open of trying to just find an error to show you guys. But I didn't find, other than just these warnings, I didn't find a good error. But what I did find, I thought this was really cool. So it was just a Code Academy article I was reading. But when you click over to the console, they have a little message there that they've purposely put into their console here. So they're assuming that if you're on this tab that you have some kind of connection to development. And so they're using it as a recruiting tool. So they're like, hey, like if you're check out our careers pages. So I thought that was kind of neat. I feel like that's a very clever way to, you know, do like an initial screening on the people applying to your jobs. Cool. Well, that is what I have for you. Let me go back to my slides here. Nope. Just a couple of resources, you know, cat codes, because everybody needs those in their life. If you're interested in saving the I'm a teapot, or just reading about it because it's a really funny story. If you want to play a little bit more with code, CodePen provides a browser editor that you can play around with and do the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in like little built-in text editors. And then another website that I love that's just very pleasing to look at is called Zen Garden. They're really cool because they provide this base code and they invite anybody to take their HTML, their base information that they provide you, and put different stylings on it. And so the only thing that's changed through all of these different pages that people submit is just the CSS code. And it's just absolutely incredible the very creative ways that people take this content and change it. So it really speaks to the power of CSS, which I think is really fun just to click through, just to have a little bit of an idea of what's possible. There's also this really amazing show on Netflix. It's part of a series they do called Explained, and it's just like a 20-minute video or so talking about coding. But I really like the way that they break it down. They talk about what languages are, they talk about why coding's important, you know, sort of when things go wrong. But if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about coding, I definitely encourage you to check that out. It's pretty fascinating. And then other than that, I would love to hang out and chat with you guys. Please ask questions if you have any. I can go over more topics. I can share my screen to look at anything else that you're interested in. But I'd like to turn over this time for questions, if you have any.
Yeah, you're more welcome to mute yourself if you have a question. You guys have that ability through the meeting room.
Yeah, please. I'll pull the chat out as well if that's a better medium for you. Sorry if I was a little lagging behind on that. I got too excited. Yep, and yeah. Go ahead,
just as everybody flows in with any questions, just to let you know, we do have a follow-up event that we're having on Friday, where our lead instructor, Harrison, is going to be talking about our remote program and how the classroom functions inside of Zoom and Slack. We also have a start happening this weekend, which is kind of the next step after this meetup. So basically it's a 2-day event. It's from 9 to 5. We're going to teach you HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to teach you how to build a website from the ground up, and we're going to help you put that live on the internet. We also have a promo code right now for 50% off for Jumpstart. So as follow-up to this presentation, I'm going to be sending out the slides. I'm going to be sending out the video, and then I'm going to send you out the promo code to anybody who's interested in joining us this weekend. You have that ability as well. So,
yeah, Jumpstart's super fun. It's a great way to just dive more into the languages and the technologies that we have available to us, which is really cool. I'm just reading through some of the questions that I missed, but one of the questions is, would this save your code? And I assume that you're like the changes that we made in the browser, and no, it doesn't save. As soon as you refresh, Google is fine. We didn't permanently hack any Google pages or anything, but it's more of meant of like a sandbox situation to be able to play around in. But I just think that not a lot of people know that all of that stuff is there, which I think is really fun. Great. And Rachel and I.
You also have a question from Ara there in the chat, if you see that.
Oh, great. Am I missing it? Sorry.
She's asking if, oh, it looks like Sarah, Rachel is asking.
Oh, great. Okay.
Talking about algorithms and data structures and if they would help them understand syntax.
Perfect. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, algorithms and data structure are definitely a huge, huge topic. Data science is incredibly popular right now. We've expanded technology to create this ability to consume so much information, to get so many data points, and it's really amazing what we can bring in. But those data points are only useful if somebody can interpret them and making them meaningful. And that's the job of data scientists, and it's widely in demand right now. But it takes a very specialized knowledge, because not only do you have to have the concept and the tools to be a developer, you have to have an understanding of the topic that you are interacting with, to be able to interpret that meaningfully. So, I mean, if I was to go in and say like, okay, fantastic, I'm going to go look at, the satellite data points and try to, parse through this information. Like, I don't know what people are looking for. I don't know how I could make that data meaningful, even though I would have it probably coming out my ears. So it takes a lot of knowledge of the topic as well, and what data points are going to be useful in order to continue your research. And someone from my cohort, was an amazing person. She had a background as an engineer, but worked in a medical field and did medical technology, and then wanted to learn to become a developer, and now is a data engineer in the medical field. But she was able to take her knowledge of the medical field and what data is useful and transition that into a data scientist. And really that's kind of the perfect marriage of those two things. So one of the ththings that we do at Learn is have that career transition where people that have knowledge in other areas can apply it to coding. And data science is just one of many, but I think that's a really important distinction, is figuring out that thing that you're interested in and applying it to data. So yes, we do cover that. It's definitely a bit of a bigger scope than what we focus on at Learn, but we get the fundamentals so that you can continue on and learn whatever you want to do after that. But we do like to touch on it a little bit because it's so popular. And yeah, there's amazing extra resources. I wish our cohort could be twice as long, because there's just so much good stuff to teach, but it's just not a practical way to go. We want to teach you the fundamentals, and we want to teach you how to learn, and then we want you to go off in the world and do awesome stuff.
Cool. So if you have any last minute questions here, please go ahead and chime in. I think we're kind of on the tail end of our presentation here. Just to remind everyone one more time, like I said, you should definitely check us out on Friday from 12 to 1. We're going to have a good time. What's up?
Oh, nothing. Sorry, I'm just excited. Oh, please.
No, yeah, come hang out with us Friday from 12 to 1. We're going to have a good time. And then definitely come through Jumpstart. You're going to take these skills to the next level. And that's really what's going to kind of bring this presentation together.
Yeah, just maybe just an announcement, hopefully, that would you guys be able to announce us when you guys be approved for the VA vet tech? Because I know at least 5 veterans that are waiting for you guys to get approved.
Absolutely.
I've searched all over the place already, and I've found that you guys are worth deserving the wait. So
Yeah.
I know at least 5 people that's waiting to get into you guys. So
Yeah,
you guys will announce
you and us both for sure. It was it's a long approval process, and we're in it. So we just have to. We're just taking away to get there.
Yeah, once we get we can't apply yet till September. So once we can apply in September, we're pretty much hoping that by 2021 that will be launched. We're also trying to get in the GI Bill. So both of these things are they just with all the regulations behind it, it is a little time consuming to get that process moving, but I do want to promise you that that is on the top of our list of things to do. That's for sure.
Yeah, because when you open that, they will have a floodgates of veterans. You guys will be busy. That's for sure.
Yep,
We
we can't
can't
wait.
wait. We
We
want
can't
it.
wait.
We want all the people because you guys bring such awesome knowledge. We've had a few people that are, that are veterans, and they always just like bring such a cool perspective. So we're definitely, it was a 2-year waiting period once we were approved for something else. So we're in that period right now, and we just have to, get it out. But thank you for checking in, and please continue.
Yeah, please announce that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Great. So last call on questions. Anyone? No? All right. So like I said, we're going to post this recording. We're going to post the slides. I'm going to post this in the meetup group on the event page. And then we'll also get out the promo code for this weekend to all of you. And hopefully we'll see you guys here throughout the rest of the week. You see Sarah's LinkedIn link down there. You're more than welcome to reach out to Sarah, ask any questions you have. I'm also available on LinkedIn, TJ Kidder, and you're also able to reach out to Rachel here. She works at Payload Academy as well. So please, come to our website, come to our LinkedIn profiles. You can ask us any questions. Other than that, we'll see you guys later. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye now.